Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Super Mario Bros. 3. In the last part, we started off World 3 and got the majority of the way through it, and now we're in the second fortress. This fortress is large underwater, so you might want to bring in a frog suit. The only reason I say might is Bob-omb might not exactly be the most ideal fight to use a frog suit against, because you always fight him on land. But this level's a little interesting. That introduces a relatively rare enemy in Mario. It's only shown up, I think, since this in Mario Maker and Mario Run. This is Stretch, little cousin of the Boos. They're sort of like just patrolling Boos instead of ones that home in on you. They seem more limited than normal Boos, but I honestly find them in the, like, 2 levels they're in to be a larger threat than main Boos tend to be in any of the levels they're in. If only because you're usually in more cramped spaces, whenever you're fighting Stretches. Whereas a lot of the Boos in this game are usually in wider areas, or at least a place where you can have a pretty good distance to just kind of run out of the way. Now, you might have noticed, whenever you beat a fortress, it actively crumbles. That does do something. There are certain locked doors throughout any given world's layout that disappear when the fortress is destroyed. That's there in the case you get a game over, because in that case you just have a shortcut back to an early part of the world. Not that it's really that important, especially if you're used to the game, but on a first playthrough, they're pretty useful. Oh boy, another boss pass level, and oh, there goes the fire flower, so I'm just gonna have to gun it. Oh god, I don't know how I didn't get hit there. Thank you, game. Otherwise, something I guess I should note about this level is that you can get another white mushroom house from this level, and get a P-wing, I think, from that one. If you get 44 coins throughout the level, including the ones that activate or deactivate from the P-switches located throughout. It's, really hard to do, honestly. White mushroom houses, you get good rewards from them, but they are genuinely just hard to get. I'd say genuinely, the treasure chips take more setup, but you can get them more consistently, whereas if you mess up trying to get a white mushroom house, you're just out of luck and have to die and try again, usually. So, World 3.9 here is interesting in that it's split into 2 layers, and the only reason the underwater layer exists is A, for the last portion of the level. But if you come over here to the left and hold right immediately when you enter that pipe, you can get yourself a free frog suit. Not that it's super useful, especially given that the next level is the airship, but it's there. Something I do find interesting about Mario 3 is that while the game itself is like the earliest visual marker for a lot of how the series looks even today aesthetically, a lot of its power-ups really didn't get reused much. Like, the raccoon leaf and its successor power-up we'll see down the line in this very game did eventually show back up, I think, starting in Mario 3D Land, and then they've sort of been in every game since, and that's a good 20-year power gap there. But, like, the frog suit and the other unique power-up we'll see down the line really haven't shown up much since, and that's a bit of a shame. It's the same with the turtle shell power-up in New Mario DS. Mario has a lot of cool power-ups that they sometimes just don't use. Also, this island's based off of Japan, and the castle is located where Kyoto would be, if memory serves. And also, that's a Kappa. I want to say this is the king that's changed into Yoshi in the Super Nintendo All-Stars version. I think. It's either this world or the next world, but I would think it's this world overall. Oh my god, he hops so fast. So, frog suit's not exactly ideal for airship levels, because while the frog itself, I think, has a higher initial jump than Mario, or at least when you get your speed going, you're just very limited in your horizontal movement, so it's not really worth keeping around. The fact that give you one for free in the level before this is a bit weird. In fact, part of me wonders if the levels themselves were always kind of shifting around in order in development when it came to where they were located within each individual world. And admittedly, that would explain some of this game's weird difficulty curves, because Mario 3's difficulty, it does go pretty stably upwards from world to world, but the levels within that world are all over the place usually in a way that feels kind of weird. And the bosses especially exemplify this in my eyes, because I think the hardest boss out of the Koopalings is honestly the one we're about to fight. Whereas, say Mario World, for instance, unless you, say, use Star Road to go out of your way to a later game level very early, the game in general has a more steady difficulty curve. But time for the third Koopaling. This is Wendy Koopa. She bounces all over the place and fires rings that bounce around the room, making this probably the most crowded of the Koopaling fights in general. I'd say overall, if you can beat this fight, you're over the biggest hump of the game boss-wise. Maybe not so much level-wise, but if you could beat Wendy, you're not going to have any problem with what's coming up next. But this is what I was talking about, I believe, last part. If you fail during an airship stage, it flies elsewhere. And you can prevent it from flying off from there by using a anchor if you have one in your inventory from any white mushroom houses, or I think you can probably get them rarely from the normal toad houses. But that's World 3 done. It's not too bad for a water world overall if you can find some frogs, which you especially won't find the water levels too troublesome. Just be careful about certain hazards like boss bass. Also, gotta hand it to Nintendo, making the King of the Castle that's in the middle of the Japan lookalike island a Mario lookalike is totally subtle and has no secondary meanings from within the company whatsoever. With that, we're on to World 4, which is a fan-favorite level theme that didn't get really revisited for a while. Greetings, the white block contains magic powers that will enable you to defeat your enemies. I've enclosed the jewel that helps protect you, Princess Toadstool. And that is one of the music boxes I brought up earlier in the LP that can make the Hammer Brothers fall asleep. Now, I'm not entirely sure what she means by the white block, because she could be talking about the music box itself. She could be talking about how note blocks can contain things for you. But I want to say that's the game actively hinting towards the white block you duck on top of in World 1 to get the first warp whistle. Not that it really matters, but eh. Also, for some reason, the toad houses in this world are a different color. I want to say it's probably just due to color palette restrictions, and there we got a Tanuki suit! That is an upgraded raccoon leaf, but because they're in relatively low supply, I don't use them too often, honestly. More on what they can do when we actually use one. But World 4's theme is big and small. Tiny, huge island, this is generally known as. Not for nothing, I love the sprite work of all the giant blocks and enemies, but it really doesn't do much gameplay-wise. It's really just, you got some bigger enemies to deal with, so watch out for some hitbox sizes. There's not even a giant mushroom that turns you giant. That wouldn't show up until New Mario DS. The most interesting thing about a lot of these levels is that this is where the game starts to really play a lot with verticality in its levels, be it things you can just find hidden up in the air and little hidden passageways that you can find from going upwards. There were a few of those earlier in the game, but like this middle third of the game is where they really start to do that a lot, at least from memory, and plus we start getting more vertically structured levels from this point forward anyway. Be careful of the Big Berthas and their babies. Now, seeing the 1-up... Actually, there's what I was about to say anyway. Be careful when it comes to collecting 1-ups in this game. Whenever you spawn one in, collect it before you hit anything else, because if you spawn another 1-up, especially in certain rooms, they will actively despawn. I want to say that's especially the case whenever it's a 1-up that spawns either from a hidden block, a brick block that's actually a power-up block, or a power-up block, period. And those are usually the most common way to get 1-ups, so yeah, be careful. Well, don't mind if I do, I'll take more items. You really gotta be careful around this point in the game if you're getting these relatively often of your inventory load, because it's very easy to just hit that max limit and just overwrite the last item over and over and over again. If anything, I would only really go for these minigames if you're trying to find that 1-up, but even then, that's not really going to be worth it if you get that 1-up, like, at the 160 point at a time margin. Now, 4-2, I believe, introduces a new block. The one we just stepped on, that was an ice block. You can pick those up like Koopa shells and kick them into things, but I think, unlike Koopa shells that will, you know, continue through anything they break or bounce off, I think they break on impact. And seeing that piece, which reminds me, this is another level where you can spawn a white mushroom house. You need to, I believe, collect 24 coins-ish? And I want to say it's another mushroom house with an anchor in it. So, you know, only really useful on maybe a first run, and even then it takes such precision to be able to get the white mushroom houses to appear a lot of the time that it's not really worth it. With that said, I think I do it completely on accident. When it comes to White Mushroom Houses, I do genuinely think the first one that we did back in World 2 is the hardest one to get. There's a reason they added coins to it in the Super Nintendo version, but a lot of the later ones they aren't easy, but they're easier, I guess is the way to phrase it. Now, this Hammer Brother introduces a new enemy. This is Sludge. It's a large Hammer Brother. He throws hammers more slowly, but when he jumps, I believe he causes a shockwave that can keep you in place for a second, but I think I'm thinking of Sludge appearances from later in the series at the same time when it comes to that. It's weird. I am a Mario fan, and I do try to play every new release. There's me hitting the Atom Max, by the way. But I don't actively return to Mario games as often as I do, say, a Zelda, a Metroid, or even a Sonic at times. So I'm sometimes a little iffy on when certain things started happening when it comes to mechanics. Like, I want to say that shake will paralyze you, but I might be thinking of a different thing in the game because there's some boss fights that do that. Which also makes me think it is the sludges in this game that start doing that, but I could just be wrong. Despite me liking the sprites, though, I think Tiny Huge Island exemplifies the problem I talked about a little earlier in the LP, where despite me liking Mario 3's environmental variety, they often don't do enough with the individual levels as mechanics. Like, I brought up Mario World before with, like, let's say the Force of Illusion. Those worlds have the secret exits you need to get in order to get to the main exit, not the real exits. Whereas this, it's just, here's bigger blocks that we don't do a lot with. Admittedly, though, barring, like, Yoshi's Island, most of the 2D Mario games play their levels relatively straight, barring, like, the usual occasional physics change. It really is 3D Mario that experiments within the space it makes to make things feel different. Because they can just make one map and use that for a minimum of, like, 7 levels in different ways to use that level design. And then Mario Odyssey kind of took that idea and ran with it because holy shit. For now, though, let's talk about World 4's first fortress. This level is a little interesting in that they actively use a different type of thwomp here, and it's not one you really see often anymore. It's thwomps that just go horizontally. There's even, I think, one that goes diagonally somewhere in here. They're still thwomps, so they're pretty easy to dodge, but be careful because they might surprise you with what direction they're gonna go. Additionally, I don't even think I've mentioned this yet, Mario 3 is the game that introduced dry bones. They are Koopa Troopas that are just straight up immortal. You step on them and they come back after a few seconds. I want to say the other Mario 3 unique power-up we haven't seen yet can take them out in one shot forever, same with Starman, but those are far and few between. I believe this Boom-Boom, by the way, despite still being Boom-Boom, can occasionally jump higher between its speed-ups, so be careful about that. Now, something I haven't talked about at all yet is the Super Mario Advance games. Those were ports of the All-Stars version of Mario's 2, 3, Yoshi's Island, and World, with the arcade game thrown in there and some voice clips added on, and the occasional extra content thing in there as well, like sometimes some new bonus levels, e-reader card functionality in the case of Mario Advance 4, which was Mario 3. I only ever played Mario Advance 1, which was Super Mario Bros. 2, and Mario Advance 3, which was Yoshi's Island, I believe. I never had the Mario World cart growing up, and I think I've only played the GBA version of Mario 3 like twice, for very short periods of time. The usual level design changes for a Super Nintendo port to the Game Boy Advance were there, like some screen crunch transitions to make things a little more fair. But ultimately, there weren't a lot of, like, super important things added in besides the e-reader levels, which at some point I might do as a little spare LP, because there's probably enough for a couple episodes there. I think Raocow did that at some point himself, even. Ultimately, the main reason I'm doing the original over the GBA version is the music, because basically any port from the Super Nintendo to the Game Boy Advance, as is famously known, the sound quality just lost so much because of the change in sound chip, and it's a shame. Honestly, I'm probably gonna eventually show off All-Stars with Mario 2 Lost Levels, because that's just the best way to play that overall. Like, the 8-bit version's kind of a neat commodity nowadays, despite being the original, but just mechanically, when it comes to anything I would do with it, at least, All-Stars is better. Now, I want to do something very particular here in level, I think this is 4 or 5 now. I want to grab this raccoon leaf, and I don't necessarily need to hold on to it, I just want it for the extra HP, because about halfway through this level, we reach this particular section of bullet bill cannons. By the way, the red bullet bills that are flashing on and off, they track onto you horizontally. They will not actively aim into you vertically. I think that would change in one of the Mario Makers, I'm not sure which. But you want to hit that block and climb this vine and enter this pipe. Because in here, you can get yourself a free Tanuki suit. And this is where I can talk about the exact differences between the Tanuki suit and the raccoon leaf. Well, you can still do the tail attack. You can press down and the attack button in midair to become an invincible statue. It's invincible, and I think stomping with it can either kill things that you can't normally kill with jumping, or at least lets you phase through them. It's neat, but honestly, it's genuinely a better power-up in any of the later games it would be in, just because the glide's more useful in those games than it is here. Because I don't even think it, like, builds P speed faster, it's just literally the raccoon leaf with a different skin besides the statue transformation. Also, we saw something a little different there. When a Hammer Brother moves, if it moves into a panel where a spade panel is, it'll actively move the spade panel. As you saw, it moved from where it was over to the right of 4-6 down to me, just about. Not that that can happen super often, but I guess there's chances you could use that to your advantage. For now, though, let's head into 4-6. Which level is this again? Oh, it's this one. This level is actually like one of the only times they do something kind of fun with the Tiny Huge Island mechanic. There's doors that swap to the level design, but the enemies are now the opposite size. And what's neat about this is you can use this to get some pretty decent coins, and I think even lives, by swapping back and forth between the two because they're counted as separate rooms. The biggest problem with this is, because it's just an enemy size swap, the level design itself doesn't accommodate exactly for both. You can definitely tell it's more threatening with the large enemies. So if you just head to the end button, you swap back to the smaller enemy size, you're probably going to just get past most of the levels challenge if there's any to begin with. This is what I mean by Mario 3's difficulty curve being kind of weird, in that the worlds do generally get harder, but there's some levels within every world that are placed weirdly number-wise or weirdly for the difficulty curve of the game. It's really the bosses that are a difficulty curve, if even. But before we end off, we might as well go get that Toad House and that Hammer Brother done with. Not that I think I get anything important from these. Yeah, it's just a super leaf. I would recommend starting to use your items in your inventory, by the way, once you get around the 4th page, because once you have 4 pages, that last page is probably going to fill up pretty quickly, especially if you do a spade panel. And to help do that, if you're small Mario, I recommend just using a Super Mushroom and then the power-up you want to use 2 items up at once, because otherwise, if you use a power-up from the inventory, you skip straight to that state. So if I'm small Mario, I'll skip straight to Tanuki Mario and shit. So that can help you clear out some inventory pretty quickly. Hold on to those P-Wings, by the way. There's specific levels you're probably going to want to use those for down the line. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4, we're finishing off World 4 and heading into World 5. See you guys then.